And the issue is not that the money is not enough. In some situations, it is not enough, yes. But in other situations where there is a lot of money, but a lot of times there aren't other forms of assistance. You a lot of times would need, like nonprofits need technical assistance, they need capacity building, they need support from different stakeholders, different sectors to think about innovative programs because a lot of times we get mired in our own sort of siloed way of thinking that this is the way that we can shift this. But actually, it could be a completely different solution from a completely different sector. So you need that kind of strategic thinking. You need to bring that into everyday discussions. It's not a once in a way. That is literally the daily work of building in that kind of strategic visioning and having the kind of empathy that you need to actually build these kind of solutions.
Hi everyone, welcome to Now Boarding, a travel podcast by me, Payal Nair. This show aims at creating awareness about ecotourism, sustainable tourism, responsible travel, and a lot more. We will cover stories and journeys of people who are ecotourism specialists and those who are leaders in their field. We will also be talking to people who have had unique travel experiences, remarkable conceptual places to stay, unexplored cultures, and ancient histories of various towns and cities around the world. Join me in this journey of knowing more about travel. Get inspired to see the world and discover your inner self. Hi everyone, today I am absolutely thrilled to welcome Antara Lahiri. Antara is director for Micron Gives. She is responsible for leading philanthropic efforts across Asia Pacific and Europe. And she's got nearly 20 years of experience in philanthropy and evidence-based social policy. We're going to talk a lot about that. And she's also made a significant impact on vulnerable children, youth, and women across multiple countries. So thank you so much for joining me today, Antara. And very quickly, Antara is based in Singapore. So we're actually in the same time zone. Thank you so much again for joining me.
Thank you so much, Payal, for inviting me. It's completely my pleasure to be online with you today.
Excellent. Okay, so let's start off by asking you about you. Like I mentioned, you've had 20 years of experience. And in all of this experience, what most significant shift in your approach to social impact work?
Okay, I think there are a couple of things which have changed, and it's also got to do with how the ecosystem around social impact has evolved over the last couple of decades. I think in some ways, the earlier part of my career, programs are designed very much for people, right? You had it's a very top-down approach. But gradually, as I've worked more in the space, I've realized that programs are not designed for people, but with people. So it's important to learn from the people that you are looking to reach. It's important to incorporate their lived experience into the programs that you're designing. So I think that's one very major shift that has happened. But the other piece, which I think is also coming from my experience as a lawyer, is that you're not just looking at an individual, you're looking at how do you actually move towards systems change? How do you think about an entire ecosystem of impact? So I think both of those things have been significant shifts in the way I think about social impact work.
Okay, yeah, I was going to ask because you do have a background in law. So, how has that training actually benefited you in the field of philanthropy and social policy?
Oh, I think it's been super helpful. Actually, initially, interestingly, when I had first started out, there was not much. It was quite a hard sell, honestly, to ask nonprofits to let me work with them because they were just like, okay, you're a lawyer, go to court. That was very much the perspective. But I think that what I tried to explain to them, and I think it's really true even today, is that being a lawyer and having legal skills helps you to develop a certain set of skills, right? It has a certain sort of analytical standpoint that you develop, certain set of research skills, certain set of communication skills. You can evaluate information and present it in a way that you can craft those kind of really persuasive narratives. That is really core to how lawyers work. And I think that's super, super critical in the social impact space as well.
Yeah, correct. I think it makes a lot of sense because it's your expertise as a lawyer that you can bring in for also the people that you work with to have a better understanding of legalities of situations that may be thrown at them. So, yeah, no, I think that's interesting. So, you have worked at the World Bank as well. Can you just mention one project or initiative that actually you found impactful?
I think it was maybe a couple of things, but I think maybe let me focus on one. We were trying to understand how do you enhance social safety nets, right? Social protection programs which are reaching children. How can you make those better? What are the components that you can add in to these kind of programs which are generally run by governments? How do you actually support governments to design these better? How can you ensure that children are obtaining better health, nutrition, and education services? How do you build the social safety net and the social protection program to pave the way for a better future for the children who it's looking to reach? And that to me was super, super impactful because that work went across several countries. And it was really a lot of learning for me and also learn in really a diversity of viewpoints, diversity of perspectives, and how do you incorporate all of that and make it in, I would say, in a meaningful way? How do you actually package it in a way that everybody can use it in some form or fashion?
Yeah, and you've had experiences working in different countries, which you continue to do. So I guess the culture and the focus of all these countries is different from each other. So for you, what kind of challenges have you actually faced to try and I mean, what exactly do you do? Do you try and blend them together? Do you try and incorporate something from one country that you think will be helpful for another country or another region?
It's actually a really good question, and it's something that I think that we don't consciously do. I think when you've been doing it over a period of time, it's a learning process that you go through with. And let me try and maybe break that down in a couple of ways. I think that you can't have a one size fits all model. I think that's a really big problem in social impact in some ways, that folks do look at it in some context as, okay, let's do this program across 15 countries. It's valid in certain situations, it's valid in certain very specific contexts.
Yeah.
But in general, in the context of, say, poverty, inequality, education, gender, the issues and the politics and the culture of each country is so specific that the programs need to be designed in a very context specific way, and definitely in a very participatory way. There is an essential component of ensuring that folks who we are looking to reach, who are in a sense, the beneficiaries, are a part of that conversation. So I would say that there is no one size fits all model. And I think that for each country, you have to think completely de novo, completely look at the specific needs and requirements. That said, there are specific interdependencies, like especially in terms of economics, poverty. There are certain interconnectedness in terms of the research, and there is some amount of, I would say, learning that you can garner across geographies and make them applicable across geographies, and that's totally valid. And I've done this a lot in my career, but I do think that it requires a lot of collaboration and coordination with stakeholders to ensure that it is contextualized to the situation that you're putting it into. It is contextualized to the people that you're trying to work with. I don't think that it's like a blank sort of let's control C, control V. I don't think that works at all. But I do think that there are important pieces of research which you can contextualize as well.
I wanted to understand, why did you focus on vulnerable children, youth, and women in your career? Why was that your focal point?
I think for me, honestly, that the answer to that question very squarely comes back, excuse me, to my parents, very much, because I grew up in a family where my mother is a social scientist and has been working with children with severe disabilities through my entire conscious life. And so she used to always take me with her to field trips, to panchayats in the middle of nowhere, like all kinds of people, exposing me to all kinds of situations from a fairly young age. And her perspective was that while you're going to a really good school and you are being brought up in a particular context, in a particular sort of, with a particular set of people around you, you have to understand that the world does not have the kind of privileges that you do. And what does it look like for everybody else? And to me, I think that really has stayed with me. That sort of was a very formative experience in my childhood, and I continued to be actually all the way till my adulthood. My mother did not let up while I was living with them, but it has in many ways led me to who I've become, because it is very much, I feel that it is just privilege for me that I had the kind of parents where, even though we were coming from middle class background, they believed in me. They focused resources, their personal time, attention, to allow me to blossom in a situation where I wasn't the best at anything, particularly honestly, but they believed in me. And I feel like a lot of children don't have that, and I feel like a lot of particularly girls and women in this world don't have that. And the unfairness of that is something that really haunts me, and it's something that I've always wanted to do something about. And equity is like a really strong calling for me, I think, like the striving towards equity.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. I think the values that also you get from when you're growing up, and if you've got a secure family environment, has a very different context when you get older and you become a part of the everyday world. I think that's when you go, and it's interesting because you mentioned your parents straight away, which means that that's where your values and your thought process actually came from. And and you're absolutely right that it's not common for a girl or a woman to actually be nurtured in such a way and to allow for her to develop as a person, as her own
Yes, exactly.
and have a better understanding of,
Exactly.
yeah.
And I think that's really, it's a matter of, you're right, it's a matter of values that are inculcated in you when you're young. I think my grandfather was a freedom fighter in the Indian independence struggle. I've heard the narratives and the striving against injustice, and I've seen my father do it. I've seen like the kind of support I've gotten. It's really a family thing, because even my brother, who's actually brilliant, I'm very average. He's actually brilliant, and he also supported me across everything and ensured that I had the best of all of the knowledge and information that he always had. And in many ways, very few people have the kind of privilege that I did of having this kind of a supportive family structure. So anything that I've done is completely because of them. It's nothing like, and it's only to me, only that I give back in the way that I've received.
Give back in the way you've received. Yeah, no, absolutely makes so much sense. Can you describe a time when you had to actually navigate complex cultural and political situations in your international work? I'm sure there probably multitudes of the same, but something that stands out for you and where you were able to actually overcome it.
There are many such instances.
I know.
And I think that almost all social impact work has that kind of very specific cultural, social, political complexity. It's not a balance sheet, right? It's not as simple as if you add two numbers together, the answer is going to be the same across
Yeah.
geographies. You can put the exact same ingredients and bring in the best of the research, and you still will not get the impact you want, because you can't convince other stakeholders of the need for this or the solution. And yeah, if the solutions were simple, then they would have already been implemented. That's a part of the challenge. We are
Yeah.
left with things which are difficult to solve for. But I think that for me personally, I think one of the times when I was working with government officials, and I think what I was trying to convince them that, so these were children who were particularly vulnerable. They were in governmental institutions, and I was trying to convince the government that we need to actually have very specific targeted programs where these children can actually overcome the difficulties that they have faced early on in their lives, and not to just write them off. Like you should make it accessible. You should make education accessible. You should make skills accessible. You need to ensure that the nuanced support that they require is made available to them. It does take a lot to change people's minds on things like this, because there is a presumption that, okay, if certain children come from certain situations or have done certain things, then that's it, write them off. But I think there was a lot of convincing that it took to actually get them to understand that there are programs that can help these children, and these children actually can be like a really strong, bright beacon of hope in the future. But it requires us to invest in them. So it had several socio-cultural and economic, I would say, complexities in that. But ultimately, they did adopt at least some of the recommendations that I had brought. I would not say I was 100% successful.
Yeah,
I was not. But
good.
I think quite a few of the changes and solutions that I recommended were taken up.
Okay, that's good. Yeah, because I think it's important that everyone get an opportunity. And then it depends on how they take the opportunity, but every single child deserves that opportunity and the circumstances that he or she may have come from in order, like, for them to become the way they have is something which you obviously have to go deeper into. And then once you get an understanding of that and you're able to help in bringing about the social change, I think all the stakeholders should be equal in their perception of it. Yeah, no, even if you manage to get 9% of whatever you had recommended in play, I think you probably did an incredible job. And I'm sure, like you said, there've been several other instances, but we won't go into that. I just wanted to ask you, because clearly there is a passion which you've had from when you were very young. So, how do you avoid a burnout when you have to deal with challenging issues, which you do maybe not on a daily basis, but on a regular basis?
It's a very good question. And actually, interestingly, it's a point that had been raised to me when I was transitioning from a purely legal piece, from working purely in the legal space to the social impact space. And it's something that folks who I had spoken to at that point of time had raised as a red flag on why not to go into social impact work, because it will burn you out, because it's a very emotional, on a very regular basis, emotional sort of engagement. But I think you're right. I think having passion and purpose is super, super important. So while there is a reality of managing the emotional side of working with at-risk groups, when you're having those interactions on a very regular basis, you have to recognize those emotions. You have to acknowledge those emotions. And as I said, I have a very supportive family. I have a very supportive spouse. I think it's important to understand that people who are working in this space will go through these emotions. And you have to recognize that this will impact your emotional state and your mental state. And that's the reality of it, especially when you're seeing the kind of difficulties and challenges that are happening at the grassroots. But I do think that it's important to maintain objectivity. And I think that when we are working in social impact, we are doing the folks we are working with a disservice if we let our emotions cloud our judgment. I think that maintaining sort of objectivity, and this is, I think, where evidence plays a really important role, where it's not a gut feel reaction. You are looking at a problem and you're trying to find solutions which have well-researched, well-documented answers and potentially can help you make very good, practical, and effective interventions which support the populations because of whom you're feeling so emotional. But you have to use that, you have to harness that, because otherwise you are just going to get wrapped up in the stress of it and in the emotion of it. But the objectivity is important, and really eye on the prize on this one, that it's my emotions are not the important thing, right? It is about who I'm trying to work for, who I'm working with, what is the situation they are going through, how can I help them best?
So, yeah. What is a common misconception about working in global philanthropy? And because there must be, and how can you address that? And can you try and change some of the misconceptions, or at least address them for people to have a better understanding?
Okay, maybe I can take one misconception that honestly that a lot of people that I know have said to me, which is that working in philanthropy must be so good, you can just write checks and you can give away money and that's your life. And I was just like, oh my God, I wish it were that simple. That would be great.
Yeah.
If like the solutions were all out there and we could just write a check and things are done. Like it doesn't work that way practically. Certainly not in the way that I've seen. So while funding is a crucial resource, it's a very valuable resource. it is not the only one, because if money could solve the problem, then a lot of problems would have been solved, because a lot of issues have had money thrown at them for decades. And the issue is not that the money is not enough. In some situations, it is not enough, yes. But in other situations where there is a lot of money, but a lot of times there aren't other forms of assistance. You a lot of times would need, like nonprofits need technical assistance, they need capacity building, they need support from different stakeholders, different sectors to think about innovative programs, because a lot of times we get mired in our own sort of siloed way of thinking that this is the way that we can shift this. But actually, it could be a completely different solution from a completely different sector. So you need that kind of strategic thinking. You need to bring that into everyday discussions. It's not a once in a way. That is literally the daily work of building in that kind of strategic visioning and having the kind of empathy that you need to actually build these kind of solutions, and the humility. And coming back to our earlier point, cultural sensitivity, can't do without that. These are really critical pieces of how do we think about these issues. So I do think that we need to challenge the stereotype that philanthropy just writes checks. There are a whole host of diverse responsibilities and pressures that come with it, because you are looking to try and build new and innovative programs or scale up existing innovative programs, all of which require very strong networking, contextualization, advocacy, research. So there's a lot that goes into it beyond writing a check.
Yeah, absolutely. And you also need to be there on ground to actually see what the needs are and what's lacking and how, therefore, writing a check will help. So that's an important understanding to, and probably the most important basis on which you then create your programs and you strategize, and then you understand how much money would really be needed. That's one. And two, to ensure that the money is actually doing what it has been planned for, or is being used for what it has been planned for, and you see the change. So I think there's multiple layers to it, which clearly you're right, people don't understand that, and they look at it from the surface, and they don't really look at the kind of work that actually goes into getting to that point, right? And then to see the end result, which probably is the most important. Yeah, no, it makes a lot of sense. What are your personal goals or aspirations moving forward?
I hope to one day do as much as I've seen my mother do. Maybe that would be a good one, where I've actually seen the kind of impact she's made on people's lives. Like I've seen it change, like within one generation, the drastic change, because she was working for the economic empowerment of youth with severe mental disabilities. And I've seen how she has allowed the family to see them for really the valuable people that they are. And that shift has happened in one generation. It's not even a multi-generational sort of thing. So I hope to do 50% of what she has done. That would be a personal goal. But I also think that I want to bring in more and more innovative solutions to the social sector. I think that having worked across a variety of organizations, whether it's multilateral, corporate, nonprofit, I think that like from the grassroots to the funders, I've seen this entire spectrum. And for me, the main sort of goal is how do I take all these experiences and build like a more innovative and creative solution to the issues that sort of haunt me on a regular basis. What does it take to solve for these complex interconnected issues? And I think that bringing that to the social sector, thinking outside the box, I think for me, collaboration is really important. So fostering that sort of that culture of collaboration where people are not competing. There is no competition in this, in my opinion. I think we are all aligning towards a common goal. So everybody's resources are important, everybody's perspectives are important. So actually having that kind of culture of innovation and creativity, I think is super, super important. And I'd love to move that needle if I can.
And I'm sure you will. I can hear the passion in your voice. And I think you're absolutely right. It's so important at the end of it, at whatever, in terms of collaboration, the ultimate goal is to see the change. So you can do it from your point of view, or you can do it from whatever you have, the resources that you have available to you. But at the end of the day, what's important is to see the change. Yeah, no, I'm sure you will. And given the fact that you now have over 20 years of experience, the fact that you have law as a background, and you've been doing so much work and within different regions as well to try and bring about social change and have a social impact, I think you're going to go far. And I've really enjoyed talking to you, Antara. Thank you. I know there was a bit of a delay and all of that from your end, but completely understand. And it's a working day. But it's the fact that we were in the same time zone, I think helped. So I've really enjoyed this conversation. And it's a good way for me to have gotten to know you a little better. And I wish you all the luck and hopefully see you soon.
Thanks so much, Payal. Complete pleasure talking to you. Really, I think many of these questions help me reflect a little bit, because when you're just running, you don't actually stop and think.
Yeah.
And this actually has given me some food for thought and some more ideas on stuff that I want to do.
Hope you enjoyed this episode of Now Boarding, a travel podcast. Check out other episodes on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, or wherever else you listen to podcasts. And of course, don't forget to share your thoughts with us. Stay tuned for more exciting episodes only on Now Boarding, a travel podcast.